The new privacy terms and policy on WhatsApp have prompted many users to switch over to things like Telegram and Signal, and these are social media services actually owned by Facebook. WhatsApp laid out new terms last week, asking users to agree to let owner Facebook and its subsidiaries collect user data, including their mobile phone number and, in fact, their location. What does data on WhatsApp want from you, and what can it do with this data? Should you be worried about whether or not this is happening? And is that enough reason for you to delete WhatsApp? Well, let's unpack all of this for you now. Bring in data privacy specialist Ross Saunders, who joins us via our video line. Ross, great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for making time. I wonder whether at the very least we're able to ascertain how users will be affected by these new terms and conditions. Can you just outline for us very quickly what the impact on the ground, so to speak, is likely to be?
Sure. I think a lot of it is actually what has been done a lot in the past. And it's talking about sharing with the parent company, being Facebook Incorporated, as to different aspects of your device and how you're using WhatsApp. And it's important to draw a distinction that they're not sharing the content of your messages. They're sharing the metadata around how you use WhatsApp and things like that. So you were mentioning location, things like that. All of these are things that they are now being very clear and open that this is what they're collecting and reasons why they're collecting it.
Yeah, interesting choice of words there. They have to be clear that this is what they're doing. It doesn't mean they haven't started doing it yet. Why should we be worried if, in fact, we should be concerned?
Well, you should always be worried when there is so much information given to one company, I think. And it comes down to what can be done with that information later. There is a tremendous amount that can be done with this information about you outside of what the content of your messages are. WhatsApp uses something called end-to-end encryption. So what I send to you is encrypted between the two of us. Not even WhatsApp can read that. But it's that broader information around it that starts spiking that privacy meter, where it's talking about your IP address, what city you're in, where you are, and all of that. And it's important to note with location, the location is tracked when you are sharing your live location or something like that. It's not that they're tracking you all the time, but it's just they can. And this can add a whole lot of different privacy aspects as to marketing to you, where you are at what time, shopping centers that you may be at, and so on.
This is in a bit of a stark contrast to what was promised back in 2014, isn't it? Facebook, at the time of acquiring WhatsApp, kind of promised that they'll try and know as little as possible about people who are using their platforms. This is simply not the case anymore.
I think it's something that we've seen a lot with Facebook, is Facebook collects an enormous amount of data, as does the likes of Google. I mean, just watching YouTube video collects a phenomenal amount of data about you. But you're right, in 2014, WhatsApp was saying that privacy is in their DNA. That has now been removed from the terms, and we are seeing that they're listing all this information that they do collect, which is considerable.
Yeah, I mean, the big question on many people's minds this morning will be, well, what should I do? Do you think it's advisable for people to start moving away from platforms like WhatsApp, given these new terms and conditions?
Look, I think the new terms and conditions in a large aspect are actually a storm in a teacup, perhaps, in that a lot of this information, if you're using the Facebook app, if you're using the Instagram app, chances are Facebook already has all this information on you already. So it's more that Facebook is busy combining all these services and platforms into a single unified platform that they've been wanting to do for years. So it's not necessarily that you have to absolutely remove WhatsApp. I think it comes down to the point as to where are you comfortable with your information being shared. And there are other platforms available that are good, like Signal, like Telegram, that don't collect as much of that metadata about you. And I think Signal is probably the most private platform that's out there. Telegram, if you don't use it correctly, can technically have a little bit less security than WhatsApp at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, many people might look at that and think, well, WhatsApp once upon a time was where Signal currently is now. I mean, what's stopping any of these platforms, after garnering enough influence, from switching up on us as WhatsApp has? I mean, we've already agreed that in 2014, they were singing a very different tune to what they're able to do now. What's stopping Signal and Telegram from doing the same thing in the next 7 years?
So I can't really comment on exactly what the future would hold from them. But if you look at the likes of Signal, Signal is actually developed and held by a nonprofit foundation that is actually a co-op between a previous director of WhatsApp who had concerns about what Facebook was doing. So there has been significant cash injection into Signal and a significant focus on keeping Signal private. That's one of their core tenets. That's not to say that something in the future could happen, but I think the way it's been set up now is they're not set up as a for-profit company. They are set up as a foundation protecting privacy. So that's something that does put me a bit at ease when it comes to using Signal.
That's interesting. It does bring to the fore, though, questions around the use of data in any context. For better or for worse, a South African population is thought of as one that doesn't really care what happens with their data. And perhaps this is changing. I mean, we've seen many instances where people have kind of raised eyebrows at the wake of these type of terms and conditions. Is there any way of gauging what something like this could mean specifically for a South African population?
Well, I think you've hit quite the nail on the head there in that South Africa is becoming aware of privacy issues. And I'm really happy that people are noticing now that there's these terms and conditions changing and all of that, because this happens all the time. You just don't necessarily notice it and you just accept the conditions without reading them. So I think with the POPI Act coming in and with the cybercrimes bill being there, I think we're really starting to gain an awareness as to this privacy space. If you look at Europe, they are acutely aware of privacy, and WhatsApp hasn't been able to put these terms in Europe because of their privacy laws. So it's good to see that we're approaching that. And I think the maturity will go along with it. And I think this is a great start to people being aware of what happens with their data, because there is going to be a time when this data is going to be nefariously used in some way or another, I think.
Yeah. The posturing framing of this development has often been in a way that kind of antagonizes these social media platforms, things like WhatsApp, et cetera, et cetera. But I've always heard that if you're receiving any service for free, the likelihood is that you're probably the price. And since you can't necessarily sell humans, at least not legally, it's things like your data that is going to be bartered. Should we be surprised that this is actually how things have evolved? In my mind, it's a natural progression of things, considering the service that WhatsApp effectively actually provides to many of its users.
I think that's very, very true. And it comes down to the trade-off between privacy and convenience. WhatsApp is incredibly convenient. The majority of these terms are coming in because of features that WhatsApp is introducing later for businesses, where you can transact with a business and buy things over WhatsApp, and you can have your entire economy running in the platform. So they are building this for a progression, but it comes to the point where you have to decide what is convenient and what is an invasion of privacy, and where do I draw the line between that, because it's always going to be a trade-off with a free service.
Yeah. In some respects, countries can't avoid that too. I mean, we're in a situation where some might argue a Mark Zuckerberg is arguably now more powerful than a Donald Trump, considering how he was able to essentially silence the president on one of the largest platforms in the world. How should countries be watching these changes in terms and conditions? And perhaps should we start asking our countries to hold the platforms a whole lot more accountable than they are now?
So that's an interesting space that comes into a lot of the legal discussion as well. So if you look at Europe, like I said, WhatsApp hasn't been able to put a lot of these terms and conditions in, because in the European Union, there's the General Data Protection Regulation, which is a law that stops Facebook from doing this. And in August last year, there was a ruling that really threw a spanner in the works for Facebook around this. Now, if you look at POPI does not apply outside of the borders of South Africa. So we don't have as much teeth as GDPR. But talking about countries having this, even America is now getting to the point, and hopefully under the new administration, we'll see a lot more traction on a federal privacy regulation, which could help rein Facebook in a bit, because they really are, in America, that you can do a lot with data that you can't do in the rest of the world. And I think the Federal Trade Commission, as well as a number of states in the US, have raised concerns with Facebook for this. So I do think there's light at the end of the tunnel with a regulation stopping them from doing the wrong thing with the data.
As we lead up to that point, how best can employers respond to this new development? I imagine a whole lot of debates now will take place. The reality, though, is that many of us use WhatsApp for things like work. If there's a context where an employee wants to opt out of WhatsApp, but that might affect their work in some respects, what position do you think their bosses should take?
You know, the workspace is a very different one because that's where you have laws like POPI that come into effect for you as a company. And if you're sharing client data over WhatsApp, there are a number of gray lines that you are crossing now where you're sending data overseas, you don't necessarily have consent. I would say that if you're a business using WhatsApp, I would consider alternatives that are built for business. So there are tools like Slack, there are tools like Microsoft Teams, Google Workspace has a communication aspect to it, where you can actually use for-purpose tools for your business that has a lot more security and privacy built in, and it's a paid-for service, so it's not you being that product anymore. And by all means, use WhatsApp to get your information from your clients in that initial interaction. But when you're talking about staff communication, intercompany communication, I would use a for-purpose system.
It's an incredibly interesting conversation. Thank you very much for helping us shed light on some of these contentious issues. Whilst much isn't known about where to from here, I think we can all agree that there's always been an evolution on how we communicate as a people. Thanks very much for your time.